Alright, so welcome to Nick Sibicky's Music Production Secrets. Today's lesson is going to be pretty short and boring, but really important if you're using Cubase, although any DAW that you use will need to be able to do something like this. As you can see here, I have this piece of audio loaded. We should be able to hear it. This is actually a piano recording I made a little while ago. Maybe a little bit like Evanescence or something. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, that's not today's lesson. Let's rewind. Remember the spacebar, dot, quick keys. Today's lesson is really about what happens if you don't hear sound coming out of your computer. In other words, how do you route audio out of the computer? And this really requires you to have, well, not only a computer, but also some sort of device that will play it. Now, if you just buy a computer, it will have some sort of sound card in it, some sort of just maybe, I'm not sure if they're still using Sound Blaster or what sort of chip they have inside, but most motherboards will have some, computer chip that actually produces sound. In the studio, most of those chips aren't really professional enough. Most of them don't have high enough quality inputs or outputs, so we usually use some sort of external hardware. And if you've never seen an audio interface before, just go to Google, type in audio interface, and just look at all the different versions of audio interfaces you can have. There are a lot of different manufacturers of them. On your budget end, you might be looking at things like M Audio or maybe PreSonus. If you go to a consumer store, there's a whole bunch of other brands there I've never heard of because, quite frankly, I don't know anything about the consumer side of things. But if you go on up, you get to the higher end like RME and Metric Halo and maybe even DigiDesign, those types of people. So anyway, how do you actually see if your audio device, your audio interface is hooked up to your computer inside of Cubase? Well, the first menu you need to know is if you go to Devices, at the top of the screen here, and go to Device Setup. And you have all these tabs on the left, but the one I want to focus on today is this VST audio system. And right there it'll say the VST audio system ASIO driver is, in my studio is actually going to be the ASIO Fireface. This is an RME interface. You can look it up. I highly recommend it if you can get one. These are great. Although you can also see, I don't have a whole lot else hooked up right now. These don't really count. But anyway, this is really just one hardware actual box I have plugged into my computer. Maybe I'll Google a picture of it and include it in the video here too so you guys can see what it looks like. It's hooked up through FireWire and it's plugged into the back of my machine. So if you have this, if you go to this window and it says no driver like this, and let's just say that happened and I want to go back and play my audio, nothing, right? Sound of silence. Yeah, that's depressing, isn't it? Just seeing audio go by and hearing nothing. So let's go back, let's undo that. So again, if you're making sure your audio is hooked up correctly, make sure that you have your actual hardware selected in this menu. Again, this is under Devices, Device Setup, VST Audio System. Okay, that's only half the battle though. The other half that you need to know in order to hook up your hardware correctly is a little more complicated. It's also under the Devices menu. It's going to be this Vst Connections, and the quick key is F4. And I'm going to open that up. And I don't like that full screen. Let's make that smaller. So here's your Vst Connections window. And the first thing you need to notice is this has a whole bunch of different tabs. Inputs, outputs, groups, externals, and your studio. Really, I think today we're really just going to talk about 3 of these tabs. You don't really need to know the rest of these until later on. But the first and perhaps most important is actually your output. So you can actually hear what's inside Cubase. And as you can see, it has a list, or at least just one thing in the list right now, so it's not much of a list, but we have stereo out. And I can rename this. I can rename this to anything I want. I could call this Fart Clops. If you don't know Fart Clops, you should go Google that too. For about 30 seconds and listen. It's entertaining for just about that long. We'll say it's highly entertaining for just about that long. But we could add more. We could say, stereo output. This will be my, actually you don't really want to name this Fart Clops. You want to name this, let's say this is my, you might want to name this after a pair of speakers it's hooked up to. So maybe, how about the HR824s? All right, and maybe these are my Dyne Audio BM5As. Anyway, I'm just naming them after whatever type of speakers these outputs are hooked up to. But for each one, you can see that it lets me select different ports on the interface. And again, if you're using a consumer interface, you probably only have 2 ports and can't, or won't really see a whole lot of benefit of adding a whole lot of buses here. Although you might want to add a mono bus, just in case you, well, if you had a one speaker, I guess. Actually, I'm not sure why you'd really want to add a mono bus to output, but you can. I guess that's cool. More likely for output, you might want to add maybe a 5.1 bus if you have a 5.1 speaker system, and you could, name this whatever it is. And this will also show you where each speaker is going to be plugged into the back of your device. So I would take my, the Mackie HR824s and say, let's plug in the left into analog output 1, and the right analog 2, and the Dynaudios will come in 3, and the rights will come out 4, and it's so on and so on. And this just sets it up. It doesn't actually route anything, but it just makes it so that you can access all of these routings from your actual project window. Let's actually see how that happens. I'm going to close this for a second, and let's click over here and make that nicer. And you can see over here where it actually has our stereo input, and then it's going out. This piano track is going out, in this case, to our HR824s. And, I can play these, and you should be able to hear that. But I can switch it. If I click here, I can send it to the Dynaudios, and I'm actually not sure if you can hear that or not. Okay, well, let's just go back to there. And I can actually change where this audio is being routed to, which is cool. And many times if you're using multiple speaker systems, you need to know this. Okay, what if you don't have multiple speaker systems and you just totally zombied out and didn't care about any of the last, 2 minutes of stuff that I told you? Well, you still need to know this window. I'm going to hit F4 to bring it back up, because if you're recording anything through a microphone or multiple microphones, you'll still need to know about the Inputs tab. And in this case, it works the exact same way as the Outputs. We can add buses. Again, usually I don't work with 5.1 configured microphones. I'll usually only work with microphones as mono single mics or stereo pairs, so yeah, that's weird. Sure, somebody's out there got to be able to use a 5.1 microphone for something. Anyway, let's add some microphone buses. So let's just add 6 monos. We can add them, and we can name them all. Let's say I have, let's say the classic SM57 is plugged into Studio Input 3, and this one, maybe we have an AT4040, and maybe you're my U87, and you get the idea, right? You can name all these if you want. I find naming them to be very helpful, because when I close this window and I go, let's make a new mono track, add track. And again, if you don't know how to do that, go see the first video in the series, but right click and say add audio track. Now you can see which microphone it's coming from, because I've labeled them all, and assuming I've plugged them in according to whatever this chart says. So hopefully I plugged in my SM57 to analog input 3, and my AT4040 into analog 4, my U87 to analog 5. It's all really nice and labeled for me right here. When I say, okay, I've got this new audio track, which mic do I want to record from? Well, we'll use the U87 on this one. And voila, we'll be recording from that mic on this track. So really important stuff to know here regarding routing. If you don't do this, you won't be able to hear anything or record properly within Cubase. Most other major platforms like Pro Tools and Logic and Ableton all have something very similar, as this matter of learning these routing schemes for your own individual program. See you guys in the next video.